Hi, this is Paul. Monday, I'll have a video out that's in No Wait No Ads that I made yesterday. Pretty tired, sort of reflecting on sort of ordinary America, really sort of back row America, as Chris Arnatti talks about, and that'll come out Monday morning. No Wait No Ads always comes out on the full channel. I just usually Friday afternoon, if I get any time at all, I'll try, and I got to make my rough draft for Sunday, and then I got to make make a video for Monday, so there's something for Monday morning homeroom. But today was, didn't bring the dog to dog, didn't take the dog to dog training today. My wife is just busy trying to get her classroom in order. Her school starts 2 weeks early this year, and they just renovated the school, and so she couldn't get into the classroom very early, and so she's doing all those teacher things. And so it's kind of unusual, a Saturday. Usually I'm doing something with my wife on Saturdays, and so today's just been shopping, fixing, cleaning, so all the honeydews today. And part of the cool things about all the honeydews is it gives me a chance to sort of catch up on content, especially content from the corner. And so now that I just finished, I went to Costco, I went to Home Depot, I cleaned, I did everything today, and I'm just sitting down. My wife's not home yet, and she's actually got the dog because she's trying to give the dog as many experiences as we can. We turned the dog in November, which will be a sad day. It's an amazing dog. We'll miss the dog. But I think that dog is going to be an outstanding companion dog for someone. Anyway, so just, a lot of interesting content. Luke's live stream this morning, Luke started talking about a lot of the stuff Luke likes to talk about in his monologue. And then the conversation when he opened up the live stream was a lot of interesting stuff about this little corner and what it is and how it means and my role in it. And I found that very interesting. And then Bob from China, who did a conversation with Christian Baxter not very long ago, he messaged me on Twitter. I think that conversation came out just as I was getting back from, or maybe I was in Italy, I don't know, or just getting back from Italy, so I hadn't had a chance really to listen to it. Chad, I was back from Italy because Chad had sent me a text, and Chad said, "Oh, you got to listen to this one. This is a really good one." And so, just sort of processing this, I just watched a video from CNBC about how YouTube is basically outgrowing all of the other streaming services. Only Disney is bigger, but Disney has Disney Plus, Hulu, ESPN, FX. Disney has just a National Geographic. Disney just has a ton of properties, but just how fast YouTube is growing. And part of this was interesting. I was listening quite closely to a lot of what Cassidy was saying about YouTube and Mr. Beast, and just how, I often think about YouTube as sort of user-generated content, but very quickly, everybody sort of wanted to be like the television. One of the things that stood out in the Sacreds podcast with Elizabeth Oldfield when she was talking to Peter Hitchens was, Hitchens made the comment, he said, doing op-ed pieces, of course, he's dealing with written journalism. Op-ed pieces doesn't really change people's minds. Op-ed pieces confirms them in their ideas and sort of validates their ideas. And so then it was got me thinking about what exactly again is sort of going on with the live streams. And Bridges of Meaning Discord seems to be having another sort of flourishing season. And every now and then I'll sort of drop into the conversations going on in the Discord server, and I've got to actually get them on my latest phone. But anyway, so I thought, I listened to some of this content, and one description of the role I play is sort of the manager of either the music club or the comedy club, because what I sort of do is find acts and bring them to you, and then usually sort of elevate their signal. And now, It was interesting. I was watching Luke's live stream, and I've never had a conversation with Cal, and I've spoken with Neil on live streams, but I've never done a Randos conversation with Neil, and I feel really bad about how behind I am in the Randos conversations. I was going to have two the week that Nancy died, and then Nancy died, and that just completely exploded my schedule. So, but it's just amazing watching the relationships develop. And again, and then at the end of Luke's conversation, they had a really interesting conversation about growth. And we've had this conversation quite a bit. And I still believe what I believe, that small is beautiful. And this only works because it's small. And this only works because the channels are small. Even my channel, which is relatively small, at least compared to what are big channels like Vervaeke's and Peugeot's and of course Peterson's. I mean, you can kind of open up the live stream and only have 2 or 3 or 4 people come on, and you can actually have a conversation with that group, and you get enough repetition with those people. So, I've spoken with this person 4 or 5 times, and I think Neil nicely sort of laid out the numbers and said, your pools need to be proportionate for the groups to work. And in my opinion, this only works because it does grow slowly and it does grow organically. And while I certainly have had a hand in the development of what we call this little corner, yes, I've got an important role in some ways. The role I have isn't, I don't think, what many people think it is. It isn't me trying to just convince everyone of my doctrinal positions or my political positions. I tend to find American presidential campaign seasons the most awful seasons, just because the volume and the shrillness and the just, pay attention to me, pay attention to me, pay attention to the presidential campaign. This is an existential crisis. And I just think, I've lived through far too many of these things to believe that. And I know, just leave your comments. Just leave your comments. But yeah, so it's a beautiful thing, and I praise God for it. And I don't know how long it lasts or where it goes or what it does, but I've seen enough in my life to know that when a beautiful thing comes around, be thankful for it and enjoy it. It might not be there forever. It might change into something less beautiful. It might change into something more beautiful. It will always change. So, yeah, I just wanted to do a little bit of talking and then maybe take some of Luke's live stream and put that here and give you a little bit of sample of Bob and Christian's conversations. So, yeah, well, let me know what you think about this. And as always, leave a comment.
2018. I got into apologetics because I feel this like a sense of lack, sense of I don't know how to talk with someone who don't believe in God. I don't know how to share my faith without being looked as unintelligent and unintellectually intelligent. So I was diving into a lot of apologetic stuff, like Ravi Zacharias and William Lane Craig. And after a while, I just find that nobody talks in real life like William Lane Craig, if you know what I'm talking about. Like,
I do.
Nobody really, everyday Chinese people do not have the patience to sit to listen to the cosmological argument. So the more I try that approach, the more I learn that approach, the more I feel disconnected with other people and other people in the culture. And I realized around that point that I don't think a lot of Chinese people are atheists. Like, a lot of apologetics around that time was talking about or targeting new atheists.
Yes.
But I feel a lot of Chinese people, they're secular, but they're not atheists. They believe in a lot of things. So there is something disconnect in that approach. And then I heard Jordan Peterson. I was like, there's something different. He's not a Christian to begin with, but there's something different in his approach, in how he talk about all those things with other people than all the apologists that I've seen. And there's something to learn. And I don't know what to learn. So I heard that from the I heard almost exactly the same thing from the Theology in the Raw podcast with Paul Vanderklay. That's exactly how Paul was getting into this. And then I saw him processing all those things on the internet. That actually gave me a little bit clarity of okay, that's how it goes and stuff. And then the pandemic hits, and that's when I think that's also around the time that Peterson was really sick, and I'm stuck in China, and the world, the environment around me kind of stopped, and I think around that time, it's those YouTube videos that kind of helped me process all the stuff around me as well. It's also, it's not only just intellectually like edifying, but it's more like it feels like you're connected with something and someone. That's why many times when Paul Vanderklay has like a messy video, I will usually comment it on saying I love those videos the most, because I feel those are the videos that I often see during the pandemic, that it seems like he was trying to use the video to work something out. You can see the whole process, and that was the process I was in during my 3-year pandemic in China. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Oh, that's excellent. I love the way that you explained like Paul's work in reference to his synthesis with Peterson, but also with the culture, but even the humanity of how he was doing it was something during a very dehumanizing period of our history. Even through the digital space, there was like this thread that you were connected to on that, because not only did you have the context for who and what he was talking about, but it was also the fact that he, even if he had some fumbles, it was like, yeah, it's not overly produced. You can find that everywhere. That's not really what I'm hungry for. I can't spend all my hours of the day that I'm not really doing much, looking at fiction like that. And then I guess even during that time, he was also doing like rando conversations as well. Were you into those? Some?
I really like his earlier rando conversations before he gets this popular. I find his earlier rando conversations, there are some really genuine struggling people that just opened up and being honest about that. I don't remember the names, but I remember those earlier rando conversations actually brought me a lot of like deep, there's a deep resonance between those conversations and how the way that I watched it. It's the same as I really love the early Jordan Peterson conversation. That one, right after he got better, he had one conversation with Jonathan Pageau. That one was deeply touching for me. Yeah. Like I contrast that with the ones that he did with Bishop Barron and Sam Harris. I think the one he did with Sam Harris and Bishop Barron are very similar in the sense of both parties have a very locked in framework. They almost seem like they're not talking with each other. They're in the presence with each other to talk with the public. But the early one with Jonathan Pageau, you can see he was struggling with something. And Jonathan Pageau was more being a friend to him. And that sincerity and genuineness, like I just feel like that was really empowering to me.
It is. I mean, Peterson was, coming off from being so sick. I mean, you can even tell in his countenance how he did not look healthy yet. You know, when you're in that state, you're vulnerable and you're emotional, you know, even because, and, you know, but they decided to have that conversation, and he was even then really wrestling with faith, I guess you could say. And it's interesting when you talk about like Barron or Harris and these guys, when they get into kind of an ideological framework, or even kind of this old, it's an older conversation now how old are you, Bob?
I'm 35.
So it's beginning to be an older conversation for myself and yourself, like even how you were saying that the apologetic conversation coming into William Lane Craig in like 2018, that conversation is like a 30-year-old conversation that has kind of done what it needed to do, which was meet the scientific fundamentalist and the Christian fundamentalist. They had to have the war of ideas, and that war has, you know, I think even if you've watched the conversation between Chris Williamson and Alex O'Connor this week,
Yeah, I did yesterday.
Yeah, so I was watching it at the same time, and that conversation represents a huge shift from what it means for atheists to talk about Christianity. I think that conversation is extremely important, because you had two atheists. They weren't arguing that was like a passe to try to have the argument about, they're like, well, let's talk about the moral realities of this, or the personal realities of the way Alex talked about Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and even how that drew Chris in to talk. It was like they were talking about kind of like a Randos conversation between friends, between Ayaan and Richard Dawkins. And it's like, dude, they were like, you're stepping out of the friendship when you kind of do what you ask her about the virgin birth. Like, it's like it's crazy to watch from my perspective, because like pre-2010, I was watching a lot of apologetics around 2010. Like, that was a big part of my life. And so for two atheists to sit there and talk about that, which was always my beef with the whole argument, was like when it would just evolve into ad hominem, it was like, ugh. And these guys are kind of like having the same reaction. And it's like, that's a more human reaction, I guess you could say, or something. And it's transcending the ideological to something else. And I think that's really fascinating. And that was kind of what you were pointing to, it sounds like, in that difference of what you ran into listening to William Lane Craig, he's a brilliant man. And I think his work was important because it had those questions had to be addressed. They just had to be, but they aren't the only questions. They aren't the only problems that we face, and I think you've been hitting on that, articulating that really well. And it's interesting for you to make that distinction between Chinese culture not really being atheist, but being secular. And they believe in a lot of things, a lot of probably quote unquote irrational things or something, and so the conversation isn't even the conversation. I think that's so fascinating. And so have you been able to have different conversations as a result of listening to these other people, with friends and people that you're around?
Yeah, I think I try to apply what I learned from Jordan Peterson, John Vervaeke, even you in this corner of the internet. I don't engage much online, simply because of like the work, the time, and I don't have that lot of time online. I'm trying to apply similar approach to my students, that I feel my students sometimes are my randos that a lot of times I don't know the education in the States, but in China, it's very heavily on memorization. It feels like a teacher's role is always teaching some kind of content. It always feels like it's like the students are downloading content from the teacher's brain. That's how education process feel like. And there's no real connection. There's no real teacher-student relationship or friendship. So what I learned from this space, one of the big thing was how people like you and Paul, when you guys were doing interviews, you really dive into people's stories. And I think our culture, and especially our education, lost this. That we don't see human as humans anymore. At least in my setting, we see them as machines that download information and organize those information for the great test scores to get the job and the life that they want. So for me, learn this. I try to just find all sorts of ways to connect with the students. Maybe ask them questions. Maybe ask them about what they like, what they don't like. Why don't they like this? What are something that they're struggling in life? And at first, it's so countercultural. It kind of caught them off guard because they don't have someone who deeply care about them without all the other stuff, like their scores, their achievements and stuff. And then I feel that they sense a little bit of, oh, that's what it feels like, being cared by someone who is like a teacher or mentor. And then they open up to you a little bit. And then you just see things are growing and stuff. I feel that's what one of the big things that I learned in the space. And I feel you cannot have a faith conversation until you establish that type of relationship. If you do not care about them, they have no reason to care about whatever you said, the God you cared about. That's what I learned about.
We were talking about PBK, talking about relational ontology, but in this very academic, almost dissecting way that seems like uncomfortably at odds with what relational ontology is supposed to be or what it's supposed to describe, insofar as it can ever be described by any academic label.
Right.
But you said, but what is it if you don't love? But, it seems to me that putting love into action is actually a strong point of PBK and something that he's familiar with doing. And I know you know that as well. So I guess my question is, what did you mean by that specific critique? Because it's almost like this is almost like a failure.
Keep going. We got a leg.
It's almost like a failure to like reflexively build back into your theory of relational ontology the necessity of like the operation of love. I guess what you're saying is like almost from an intellectual standpoint, you're not seeing that reflected enough or in some way in the discussion, you're not seeing love reflected enough. What did you mean?
So it's not so much about PBK, the conversation, because PBK, I think, does both of these things. He has, which was why I've always praised, which is why I actually think the TLC is connected to PBK, not Jordan Peterson or the Peterson sphere. And this is part of my problem with Christian, what I call Christian YouTube versus TLC, and the academic versus the really relational, because that's probably my biggest critique of academia and scholastic reasoning is it's divorced from relationship, and it's divorced from I don't think it's actually person-centric. I think it's principle-first-centric. And so I was talking about the Karen Wong, DC Schindler.
Yeah, did you say the road to hell is paved with first principles?
Yeah.
that triggered some part of me that I thought was dead, but it's still alive, and it got triggered
Yeah,
and killed again.
it triggered a lot of people, I'm sure. That's like why it's so funny how these different mediums are different, because I always made people so much more angry on Twitter back in my Twitter days, probably in my pre-TLC days, because in writing I say just harsher, meaner things like that, like they just piss people off. But so my point was from the Jordan Hall, because this is what I was thinking. Like, even go all the way back to, I made that video about Nathan Jacobs a little bit, where I put Nathan Jacobs on blast, where I'm like, we probably agree, like on paper, we probably agree on 99.5% of philosophical and theological things, or like most of what I've seen of everything that he says. I'm like, you're right. But the way you're talking about it, and the way you're setting up your podcast, and the way that you're doing all this, I think is wrong. Because it's the difference between TLC and, because I guess this is what I'd say is, like, even Karen is not, I don't know, I wouldn't say that Karen isn't part of TLC. She is, but she's, in my opinion, she's a little bit on the periphery of it. Like, to me, the center of TLC is PBK, and then it's people like really, it's like Chad and me and people doing these live streams talking to, like, really the randos of the randos. People completely without status, essentially, that nobody cares about, that aren't going to get clicks. Like, Jordan Hall is smart. All these tech people like him. Dishi Schindler is an academic who's like spoken lectures internationally at all these places in the world. That's playing this secret, like, hidden game of prioritizing principles and facts and logic and scholasticism and reason, and you can be right about everything you're saying propositionally, and the spirit is wrong.
Can I steel man what you're saying, Luke? See if this matches. So there's an unspoken assumption, it's just like the water we swim in, that if you are to start any sort of intellectual or creative endeavor, that primarily that intellectual or creative endeavor has to be about the ideas, and it has to be provocative, because no one's going to care unless you're doing something different than the norm. But fundamentally, it's about the ideas. It's like, intellectually, creatively, what does that individual have to bear? So it's not, in effect, communal. And so like every other YouTube channel, every other TikTok channel, is primarily about content, whatever the content is. So it's the contentification of Christianity, of Judaism, of whatever.
Info.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the magic of TLC is, and I don't know I don't know how this could happen from someone saying, like, I'm going to create a TLC, because what actually happened is TLC is a side effect of PBK trying to help individual people.
Yes.
It's actually a side effect. Like, he didn't.
Is there like a true TLC and a false TLC?
Well, like PBK didn't set out to,
like a Whitestone TLC, but that's the Whitestone TLC. And now I'm using articles in front of TLC, which is something I swore I would never do. Can I quote something that seems appropriate? Like Howard Storm, he dies. He has like one of the longest, most intense near-death experiences, which is a weird moniker. Really, it should just be a death experience or an after-death experience. But of course, Hebrews 9 says it's appointed to man to die once, and therefore it's against biblical literalism. But Howard Storm meets Jesus, and Jesus he tells Howard Storm, you have to go back to earth to live your life. And he's like, no, I want to stay. And he's like, no, you have to go. And it's like, okay, well, let me build you a shrine, or let me do some kind of like program that will bring millions to you. And Jesus said, no, the plan is you have to love the person that you're with. And he said, really, that's the plan? And Jesus says, yeah, because if you love the person that you're with, then the person that you're with is going to love the person that they're with, and they're going to love the person that they're with. And it's the plan. That's what's going to bring like the positive eschaton or whatever he said. And Howard Storm says, like, that can't be, it's too simple. And he said, no, that is the plan. That's the divine plan. So it's like there's something kind of bottom up that the real spirit of this is reflected in, but but arguably like what PBK is tempted to do, maybe almost in his false self or intellect or ego, is like he wants to scale it. He wants to replace the establishment with some other kind of like establishment, just a different kind of paradigm. But the real spirit of this is somehow going to be found in a much more bottom up or dynamic way. That's just what I'm.
The only thing I take issue with is when you say PBK wants, and I don't think that's like what he actually wants to do is help people, like help individuals. Like he's not trying to get something in terms of outcome. Like he's not thinking about the telos because he trusts the Holy Spirit.
Well, he almost explicitly isn't, because he said that before. Like, and a little bit, this is the tension between.
Maybe he's just talking to higher profile people just because he thinks it will increase the reach of his message.
No, but he says constantly that he's very hesitant to talk to high profile people. He almost doesn't do that. He could with a lot of people, but he often doesn't because that's one. I want to hear what Nick has to say, but just to clarify with that, I actually do think that PBK does the opposite of that. He will occasionally, but it takes, I think, a lot of different points of confirmation or stimulus to get him to talk to somebody who's a little bit more high profile outside of Vervaeke and Peugeot, but that's just kind of been the way that it's emerged. Because this is true. I think this is what's true of proper bodies versus institutions. It is that emanation emergence thing, but it is a very slow ferment. They build organically and they grow slowly, and they can't, because it's what Neil said earlier. PBK, this was a side thing. PBK he wasn't trying to do this, and that's almost like exactly that clip I played from Rogan when he was talking to what's her name? Yeah, I don't know. I played it in a live stream a while ago. Bridget Fedesi. Yeah, when he was saying the thing that he's most successful at, this gets at following the muse, he wasn't trying to do. And I actually think the thing he's trying to do, he's not that great at, I think, which is being a comedian. The thing that he's best at is the podcasting, and he wasn't.
Is there a thing which PBK is analogously trying to do? Because you hear me now, like as an accuser, I'm trying to steel man the accusations to try to get clear on what is it that he's being critiqued on or indicted for specifically. And that's what I would ask, but I know that Nick is here, so I know that Nick has input.
Well, I think there are people that are trying to build things that they shouldn't be. But anyhow, Nick, yeah.
But he did try to do something. I don't think he was planning of it growing like this. But he understands now that it has happened, what's going on, and he likes it.
Yeah.
And he doesn't want to lose it.
So I see two patterns, Cal. I see PBK acting basically as a bridge, in that if there are certain ideas that he feels the corner is not properly processing, then he tries to bring in those people. Like Malcolm and Simone is a perfect example of that. Like Malcolm and Simone triggered a lot of people in this space, but he thought their ideas.
Oh, now I remember whom you're talking about.
Yeah.
I still don't have categories for really what I saw when I saw that.
Yeah.
Actually, I sort of do, and I can sort of understand where they're coming from. It's very similar to where I was when I was first stepping into real faith. I think that, but not that I can even really claim to possess it now, but Jesus says, Jesus says that, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, and it grows into something really huge. And so it can be in my satanic self, I want to place limits on how far they can go in terms of real faith. But if I'm mindful of where I was when I started, then I realized that this can just be like the fake left brain confabulation labels they slap on stuff that they don't really understand, at least not in their intellect, but which in their heart is germinating and which is growing into something real. But yeah, that was, sorry. I just had a reaction to that. I saw it and I kind of like forgot like that it happened. Like I repressed it out of my memory, but it came
Yeah. So
back.
sorry, I said two patterns real quick. So one was he's bringing in new ideas that he finds compelling or interesting that he would like the corner to also process. But the second is that he brings in other people from the corner such that so you gotta, the way I think about this is in powers of 10. So you have roughly 10 channels that are downstream, that are like the major channels downstream of PVK. So Luke is one, Chad's one, Grim, etc. down the list, right? And then about a power of 10 down from that, you have about 100 active people who participate on live streams and things fairly regularly. So that's all of us on the screen right now. And then a power of 10 down from that, you have about 1,000 people who are aware of the broader community around PVK and the TLC and either comment or at least lurk and do something. And then downstream from that, you have about 10,000 people who follow PVK in some capacity, but are not more aware of the broader TLC. And so the other thing PVK is doing continuously that I see is he brings in new ideas from the outside in, he brings the inside out, meaning he's taking people who are within the TLC that, let's say, the 10,000 bucket isn't aware of, and he's kind of highlighting them and elevating them and merging them, and kind of fusing those people with, anyway, so.
There's one thing
That
about
is how we change the world, with analytics and metrics and platforms and numbers.
Amen. Okay,
There are
Nick, and then I
approximations.
heard Cassidy. Yeah. Did you have something, Nick?
It might be a little loud right now. We've got an air fryer going. We got a baby battling. So maybe I'll wait for a second.
There is a bit of a division between the YouTube world and the Discord world. There are some people that never go into Discord, and there are some people who stay a lot in Discord and don't go into YouTube much. And another thing is that I think right now PVK is the only source of new blood into the body. That's one of the big things that PVK is doing that I don't see happening nowhere else. Well, in little parts, but the big influx of people comes from there.
From PVK?
Yeah.
Yeah, because everything's downstream from him. Like I'm almost, a huge percentage of them. I don't know the analytics of this, but like Cal, I know like you were familiar with PVK, but your intro into the TLC was through Randos United, which is technically downstream of PVK.
No, it was you. It was you. I knew about Jordan Peterson. I knew about PVK from Jordan Peterson. I didn't really care for PVK's analysis. I saw you talking about universalism and this kind of Taoism influenced Christianity. That really resonated with where I was at. So I came on, wanted to talk to you. PVK I had known about, but I don't think that's actually the typical pattern. But who cares about the typical pattern?
Yeah. Go ahead, Nick.
But you found Luke through PVK?
No, I found him through searching like universalism videos, Christian universalism videos on YouTube.
But I think Cal's a little, to your point though, Nick, I think Cal's a little bit of an anomaly. If I had to guess, if you really looked at all the statistics, most of the people like Neil or whatever, Neil, I think your first time of breaking the fourth wall was on one of my live streams, but you got to my live stream through PVK. I think that's the more normal pattern that you're talking about, Nick.
Yeah, that's right.
But there is another thing besides the pattern, and that's the spirit of PVK.
Yeah.
I think the reason we can talk like this, why a bunch of randos can come together and it doesn't always end up in some strange fight, is because we have learned a way of being through looking at PVK do his thing. I don't know if, let's say, some YouTuber or some Twitch streamer, a lot of them do make Discord. I don't know if you could get something anywhere near this from one of those.
Is PVK a morphic field?
Yeah,
Is he a
you're right.
principality or a principle that everyone in this field inherits by entering the space?
I think he's more like a gardener, and he's bringing in new plants into the garden, and he lets us sort out how we welcome those new plants into the garden.
But what if one has never spoken to him personally, or even personally felt the hand, or been seen by the gardener? If we're pursuing this analogy uncomfortably far, I've never spoken to BBK, but
I think
do I nonetheless inherit his spirit by being in his space? I think probably
You
yes,
could
right?
To
get
some capacity.
that spirit
Some capacity.
from Luke. If you watch Luke streams, you can get that spirit from him.
Is that how morphic fields work, Luke? You're the expert.
Well, no. I think so. I mean, I always think of morphic fields in terms of Sheldrake's illustrations of them, which I think are like even his definition of them, which is basically a morphe, a form manifests through these fields of essentially habit that transcends space and time. Like that's the idea of what a morphic field is. And so one of the illustrations I like to use, which I think is very pertinent to TLC, and it's emergent patterns of consciousness in human beings, I think is when he talks about, well, and maybe I think about this because being trained in chemistry, but it's like when a chemist forms a crystal, a new crystalline structure is formed for the first time, it really resists formation. It doesn't want to come into being because there's no resonance for it. There's no memory of it. But then once that crystal is formed, once that habit has been initiated, the formation of that crystal technically within time is faster and faster because there's a memory of it. And so it starts to compound resonance and get stronger and stronger and stronger, to whereas something like salt is like everywhere. That crystalline form is everywhere. Like there's a deep, deep memory of it within the history of our world. Or and I think what happened with TLC, and I don't know, this is where we talk about kind of perhaps the novelty and I don't know, the unique kind of specialness of TLC that some people like to dunk on and say it's not that special, the people that think it's more cult-like. But there's so many counterexamples of why it's not cult-like, because, and one of the examples but like this pattern I think is novel, and I think it's due to this technology. It's an emergence out of the literal. We're emerging out of the literal, which, like, someone said that recently, or I retweeted Ethan. So this is a guy that I stayed with in Thunder Bay, and he said, what was his tweet? It was something like, people like to be sad that people are reading less and less, and he's like, maybe that's a good thing. Like, who knows? And I think that this pattern.
I told Bern that.
Huh?
I told Bern that.
Yeah. I think I saw you were in there somehow too. And I don't know. But this pattern.
Yeah, Socrates wasn't reading anything, right? And yet we're all supposed to read Socrates, but we're unaware of that.
But it's like this pattern, I think, that has emerged. This thing that, Rogan does a little bit, but Rogan is like he's an early form of this crystal that I think has evolved and shaped into a different thing, where I think TLC is really different. Like, I think there are glimmers of that and insights into that you see in Rogan and some of these communities, because he really is pretty community centric, even though he'll talk to some experts and do a little of his own version of Christian YouTube. But he ultimately doesn't really care. But there are things like, I'm not married to my ideas. That's a very TLC thing. Sam Tiedemann is a perfect example of this, of like when he first came into TLC, and Sam was just talking about this with, I think, Christian Baxter. There were a lot of people that were very pissed off that Sam was here. They didn't like it because he wasn't a Trinitarian. And there were people who were almost on a mission to get rid of the parasite like get him out of here. I mean, there were people that were hell bent on it, and
that's a really interesting phenomena of like the edge case. The edge case elicits a more, let's say, unconscious negative response than someone who's clearly on the outside. That's really, I got to think about that more. Anyway, talk about it.
Yeah, so but like what TLC has become though, and this is why it's not cult-like. I think Sam is a perfect example of why it's not a cult, because Sam is a central part of TLC, and it's not ideological, especially, and at least not along the Trinitarian line. So like, what is the cult-like ideological thing that we're protecting? Like MJ's my greatest critic of this thing, who probably watched this, and he often says, it's hard for me to even, I don't know, I need to practice more in Steelman MJ, because that's the very thing. I think he would say that our cult-like thing is that we are so relationally focused. And then at the end of the day, and as much as I understand him, it's like, well, I think he's a principle first thing. I think he wants to put truth first and principle first and rationality first versus the relationships. And I'm like, well, that's just where we fundamentally disagree.
Well, that's where our sacred is, Luke. Like if you come on here and if you come on here not in good faith, we pick up on that right away. The community picks up on it right away, or pretty quickly. There are trickier characters in this space, but I would say that that is the sacred of the TLC.
Is it too extreme to say that if our focus is like relationality in this really true sense, this really ultimate sense, like the ultimate relationality? Because like relationality, like Indra's Web says, relationships have priority over relata, but wait, you can't have relationships without relata. Like there's a dialectical question where to really see the true relationality, you're always like pushing further and deeper. So if we're really about that, then I guess my question is, do we even have an opposite? Is there someone who can come in and have the opposite spirit to such a degree that we would shun him? And I think if the answer is yes, then we fail. So I think there's something about, if not the actual spirit of what we may be doing, then like the true spirit behind that spirit toward which we should aspire, where there shouldn't be one that is like, say, well, he's so non-relational in his outlook that he's anathema to us. Because can there be someone really in bad faith? Can there be someone whose deepest motivation is not actually Godward and in good faith?
Yeah. So the person who wants to win, the person who always wants to win, that's that person.
Like zero sum versus
what is the good? What is the truth that he sees when he's orienting? Is it just the truth of his own worth, and that the trauma in his life has made it hard for him to see? And like some kind of vulnerable narcissist, he doesn't even acknowledge consciously that he's insecure, but he acts it out, in some Jungian way where that becomes his fate. Even that, I wonder if that's the highest good that they can see, the fact of their own worth, that they have to demonstrate over and against what the world has impressed upon them. But even then, see, I think that there's something intellectually true, something true about reality that they apprehend and that they want to fight for when they come in with a spirit of, like, say, emphasizing deduction over this kind of deep relationality that Luke was talking about when Luke was talking about the morphic fields, where the relationality of reality is built into its fabric, like as its kind of ultimate, conductive or accepting medium. And that's my sense. That's my sense, because I know I had that spirit when I was younger. And I don't think I was just totally in bad faith and totally in the place of vulnerable narcissism. Although when you are in sin to the degree that I was when I was younger, it's impossible for that not to be part of your motivations to some very significant degree, which it was in my case. But I think even then there was a truth that I saw about reality itself, about what you would call, however unfashionably in this circle, it's objectivity. or it's mind independence. Reality, in a way that it seems seems dialectical to me, has features of both radical subjectivity and like objectivity or mind independence, in a way that you go in circles all day, ouroborically trying to wrap your mind around. But anyway, so I'm talking too much, but that's just my 2 cents.
I sometimes think the emphasis on like weeding out the bad faith actors is sort of silly because at the end of the day, it's like my judgment is my judgment. It might be right, it might be flawed, but the whole point of facing someone who we perceive in bad faith should be how I act versus how they act. I can't make them change anything. And that's why I like this space, because I think it opens up the door where if someone is acting in bad faith, or if someone is perceived to be acting in bad faith, it opens up a place where you can really try and practice what that means to do that well. And there's a place of like redemption where we've given so many grace to so many people over the years who come in and create chaos. And like, yeah, maybe they get a timeout, or maybe they get, sent to the forum or something, but there's that space where we constantly get to repeat and learn, okay, it's not about what they're going to do, it's about what I'm going to do. And that's why I think whatever estuary is a trust exercise more than an idea building function. It's like learning how to trust other people in this space where we're having these conversations that mean a lot to us.
Yeah, it sounds like you're turning the tables, and you're seeing their own infinite worth as a person. You're loving them to the extent that you successfully do those things. And it's interesting because our ultimate moral example whom we follow is Jesus of Nazareth, but he's a moral example whom, based on the stories we have about him, it's easy to see him as someone who he throws out the money changers, he speaks truth to power. He calls out the Pharisees on their hypocrisy. And with those examples in mind, we can see our job is to just like cast out the bad faith actors. And I think in a strange way, if you have really deep faith in Jesus of Nazareth, and you're aspiring toward his example, then the person that you're going to be en route is going to be doing a lot less accusation and a lot more of what Cassidy was talking about. And if for me, it's when I search in myself for what most resembles them, or if I see if I can find in me like a kind of analog of what I think is their deepest motivation. That's the closest that I can come to putting love in practice, and then listening, and then waiting, and then understanding that this person didn't create himself. This person isn't at the let's say the cheesily let's say the banquet of existence at their own invitation. They're here at God's invitation. God had infinite freedom and omniscience in creating this person, and he did. And it's like before that, I need to be reverent and just kind of listen, wait, watch, like almost like if I'm infatuated with this person. Like that's where I feel called to go if I'm trying to be a follower of Jesus. And anyway.
Well, it's interesting because you can't get past the fact that in the Gospels Jesus says some very harsh words to certain people. You can't get past
Correct.
that. But I think often that gets twisted and taken out of its narrative context, where the people he says the harshest words to are the people that are closest to who he is. The Pharisee, right? Like
he's technically a Pharisee, right?
He was a Pharisee, and he was calling out.
Yeah, sociopolitically.
But what did he do to the tax collectors? Baird, can you hold on? Sorry, my husband turned on the TV, I think. What did he do to tax collectors, prostitutes? Well, he befriended them. It didn't mean that he didn't placate what was true, but he sat at their table and ate food with them. I think so often
Oh, Cassidy, we lost you. Give her about 10 seconds. Oh, I think
Am I
you're coming back. Yeah, you're back.
I think there's 2 modems in our house, and I tried to move to the other one, and I don't think it's switched. Anyways, I think there's just something.
You were at him. He didn't. You said he didn't placate the truth, like he didn't soften the truth, but he was sitting with the tax collectors.
Yeah, he would sit with tax collectors and he would share a meal with them. He recognized their humanity of worthy to be sat with. And like, you know, you look at the woman at the well. Yeah, he called her out on her sin, but he loved her first. He showed a connection to her first. He showed her dignity first. And that's not what's happening online. What's happening online is we have to destroy our enemies, at least in the culture war sense. I don't think it's happening in the corner, at least not.
You're right.
But I have to destroy my enemies. We have to show how evil they are because we have to protect the truth, the good. No real question about whether that in itself is beautiful or the real pattern of Jesus. But yeah, I think that's something that is different in the corner where we are people first, even if they think absolutely differently than we do. We try not to lose the humanity of the person. And when we do, sometimes there's forgiveness offered. And there's a place where we're trying to redeem those relationships.
But what's happening, what I think's happening, and it always happens slowly, so it's almost imperceptible. So Luke mentioned earlier, the point of being is to create good persons. And it's the same with, as I see Christ in the Gospels, is that he is speaking as much as he can to whoever will listen, when they can listen. So an example of that is the rich young man who comes to him and says, "What must I do to inherit the kingdom of heaven?" And he gives the litany of the standard answers. And then it says, Jesus looked at him and loved him. And then he said, well, the last thing you need to do is give up everything you have. He didn't say that, but he says, just give up everything you have and follow me. So, but the point is this: if Jesus, let's say God is being itself, or Christ is being itself, and Christ is love, he's going to match exactly what you need when you need it to bring you to the next step, to the next level. But I see that happening within TLC. So Cal was talking earlier about he's not the same person as when he stumbled into this space. Now, I don't know how much my heart is being changed by like the Eucharist every Sunday versus this space versus the Bible studies I do every week. I don't know how much my heart is being changed by each of those things, but I do notice certain patterns in my underlying thinking and thought process, like resentment goes down, attempting to always get what I want goes down, certain things, and like where I give up something that I regarded as a like a sacred idol within my own value hierarchy, and then suddenly I'm actually happier. Like the thing that I thought I wanted, it's like, oh wow, that's gone. And anyway, so we don't know how we're being changed through TLC or by TLC, but from everything I've seen, at least in my own experience, it's been good. So.
Right. And I think you say something important of like there are these different arenas in your life that are changing you, whether it's the spiritual, the familial, whatever, but TLC is part of that. And I think you're in danger of it becoming a cult if TLC is the first and the only, which has never really been the case. It's sort of been an interesting space that a lot of people go to, maybe first online, but Paul never wanted it to be the first and the only. He says, go to church. If you have questions, try, like, I'm not your pastor. You can't be a pastor online. You got to find somebody who's local. Like, these things inherently break that pattern of it being a cult. It would be cultish if Paul's like, okay, you have to pay a paywall to get in to be part of these rando groups, and you can't talk about it with your family and friends. If they dislike it, you have to cut them off or bring them in. Like, that is cult behavior.
Well, on the cultish temptation, I've thought about this in relation to the non-physicality of this space, because you got to think, okay, a cult's about controlling behavior. And I mean, I suppose you could do it through mind control, right? If we're truly a virtual space and we mind control people to think a certain way. But that in the history of cults, that seems to be insufficient. You tend to need proximity and you need other people around who are reinforcing the appropriate ways to act and behave. I think actually the virtual world is becoming more real in terms of, so what I mean by more real, I mean in terms of like changing how people act and influencing how they behave, you know, because of the smartphone and things like that, because of the, I think it is, but it's still, I've thought about the non-physical aspect of this potentially being one of the best things going for it, in that like it's far easier for us to live with each other because we're not living with each other. Like if you live with someone and like, yeah, anyway, what do you think of that?
I think you need a hybrid model because it's good to a point, but then when you see people in real crisis, it becomes so difficult that it's not planted locally in all of these ways. And you get too far into the online, you really lose sight of what it is to have that personal. I mean, I met my husband through this, so it's not to minimize the connections you can make online and the certain ways that it can reduce conflict of sorts. But we never could have continued our relationship if we never grounded it in the reality. And that's what I think you're seeing with some of these long-term in-person estuaries, where that actual meet space quality about what we're doing here makes it so it's not just some weird internet project, you know. And the times where I've been able to meet people who I've met on the internet, host them in my house, those have been the most kind of beautiful experiences, because it makes the thing hope for a reality. Like you can taste that sense of like, oh, this is not just some weird thing I do on the internet. This is like real, and this is something good. So I'm not anti the online estuary. I think it has its benefits, and it certainly is a great place to open the door to that. But I don't think it has a future if it doesn't plant locally. Which is why I do the festival stuff.
One other topic, somewhat tangential to this, but I'm curious your perspective on this, Casti, and also Luke, because you've been here pretty much since the beginning. So there's this concept with any new thing, with any new fad, it's called the Gartner hype cycle, where and like every stock market bubble is like this, where you have an initial kind of like hype phase of the thing. And to me, that feels like within TLC timelines, that feels like 2018, 2019, 2020 was probably the peak of that because COVID and because you know, it was so online. And then the hype, what happens is there's a trough of disillusionment where it's like, oh, so the internet bubble is a case in point where like that didn't come to fruition right away. So but then what typically happens is if a company or a movement survives the trough of disillusionment, it slowly but steadily grows. And it feels like we're kind of out of that low place. I don't know, in terms of the life cycle of this space, have you noticed kind of an overall trend? It's hard to, you know.
I mean, at this point, it's sort of started to fragment a little bit. I think the hype has sort of lowered, but it's the seeds have sort of been planted, and now you're seeing different kind of plants grow, and you're getting that with the different channels that are coming around. Is that good? Is that bad? Well, probably a little bit of both. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Luke?
Yeah, I think that growth, well, healthy growth, I think probably happens and starts and fits a little bit. Like even if you think about a human being growing, like I think about my kids, there are definitely times and seasons which they're growing a lot. And then there's times and seasons where that kind of plateaus off for a while and then, you know, goes back up. And then if it goes down, that's not really good. You know, a true body, I think, should be growing consistently. But, you know, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with TLC. You know, there's been some, I don't know, breaks or siphoning off or whatever. And I think some of that's just going to be inevitable. It's kind of that, and this isn't even a criticism, but part of it is, I often think of they went out from us because they were not of us. And I don't even think of that in like a condemnatory, judgmental thing. It's just like a statement of reality. Like if somebody's not communing and resonating with this thing, they're not going to stay there. And that's, I think, perfectly fine. Chad will say these kinds of things sometimes, and I think, Neil, you're probably of this opinion that whatever TLC is, it may change and emerge and grow and evolve and become some kind of really big thing, because I often think of that Peterson University thing and how they're trying to build some kind of social media thing into that. And I even think about what's happening with Rogan and comedy, and there's got to be some kind of, there has to be a communal pattern to it of real communities that are co-creating and building things together, or else it's just, I think there's only so big that something can grow if it's just merely consumption. I think that eventually is going to like fall off a cliff.
Yeah, you have to have that consumption creation dynamic where, but the fasting and feasting, right? So there's the times to consume, but then there's going to be times where you stop that. And I think the best way to do that is to go and create something. But that also has its dangers, right? There's all of these pitfalls that come with creation, especially when you're doing it online. And you can have the best intentions in the world and have the rosiest glasses, and the thing that you least expect hits you and takes you down in a way that you can't describe. And yeah, and sometimes that taste of the danger in that can make you want to not get up and do it again. But that's where I think having a good community where you have that support helps you to do that even in the space of fear. And we've created that somewhere online, but it's so helpful if you have a bit of it in person, especially if you're going out to create something.
So this question from Casual Carter, can't we pull the weeds in the wheat? Wasn't that somewhere in the Bible? Yeah, I mean, I have a lot to say about that. I think in general, when you are, so this gets at the like universality, particularity part of it, because in the universal sense, pulling the weeds, in my opinion, is God's job. And that's going to happen like great white throne judgment type stuff. Will the real wheat Christians have a process in that judgment? I don't know. Or be involved in it? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. But like, that's just not something I'm that concerned with, like discerning who is in and out. However, I think when it comes at the more particular, local, instantiated, non-universal expression of which the universal is an expression, like when you're trying to do something, I think then you have to pull weeds, because there are going to be people that are, for whatever reason, just they're going to be a problem toward the goal of whatever you're trying to accomplish. Like if you're actually trying to build a building or something, and you're constantly building walls, and somebody just comes through with a sledgehammer and just is destroying walls constantly behind you as you're building it, you have to get rid of that weed, or else you're never going to build the building. But that's like when you're actually trying to do something. So then I don't know, in TLC land, this a little bit gets at the like snakes. This is where I think the TLC is kind of Taoist in a sense, because like, are there people at times, to me, in my own judgment, that I feel like are antithetical to, and they're behaving in a way that is opposed to person making, and they're just trying to sow division? Yeah, I think that happens. But also, per my vision, I have to include those people. So like, but if I was trying to build a house, I probably wouldn't do that. Like if you were constantly trying to tear down my house, I'd be like, you need to leave.
Well, it's interesting, the snake dynamic. I used to live in Arizona, and we'd have rattlesnakes. And if you see a rattlesnake in the wild, you just take a wide breath. You just leave it. They're more scared of you. But if a rattlesnake comes in your backyard, you got to kill it, especially if you have kids, because one bite's going to kill you. And so it's like these places of like where is that thing in its proper place in its proper ecosystem. And like I've been thinking a lot about this idea of like weeding, because I am trying to I'm trying to figure out what to do with my film. And like I'm a little, like, if I'm honest, I'm like terrified of it, because you just know what it could cost for yourself and for others. And there's that level in which you're kind of like, I'm fine without it. But there's the other side of you that's like, not do anything is to how would I say it? To not put the right value on everyone else who put their energy into it. It's not just about you anymore. And so figuring out what's the right pattern in the way, and how do you judge how much energy you have and what state your yard is in. That's not easy, especially if it does feel like you're just drowning in weeds. And I think that's some of the questions we're asking in TLC. We want to make something bigger. We see the potential for this to be something good, but you know, at what stage and what place do we have to like take the next step, and how in order is our backyard?
Right. And I don't think you can take, this is where like, who said this earlier? OG said, I mean, this is true. This is kind of what we said, be open to people, God bringing opponent processing, which is what I think I just articulated and what we're trying to do. And he said, be careful with your utopias. But to me, that is what utopianism, which is no place, right? Because it doesn't exist, is when you're trying to bring too much emanation on the emergence. The emanation is trying to overpower the emergence and force it into being whatever that emanating mind wants it to be. And that's the utopianism. That's authoritarianism. That doesn't work. And I don't think you can take TLC broadly, because that is kind of like the big umbrella, and make it into something, because it is that naturally emerging thing that has the mystical emanation that we don't know what it is. So if you try to direct that into something, you're going to be authoritarian, and it's going to collapse and it's going to fail. However, there can be little sub-emergent creations that happen within TLC that become their own things, and I think that's where the weeding happens. I don't think you can weed the snakes at the TLC level. I think you can weed the snakes at the lower emergent body level.
There's this obsession in the last 50 years, I would say, of get to market quickly, the startup culture, do everything fast, break things, go fast now. And I think this is the opposite in that, I'll just leave it at that. Even if we grow at like 5% a year, but the relationships are strong, it's going to survive storms. Yeah.
Well, I don't know how much you guys follow YouTube culture, like in a broader sense, but I find it very interesting, especially because I create on there, and you're seeing that problem coming up with Mr. Beast, where he's kind of got this mindset of, I want to be the best YouTuber. But in his mind, the best YouTuber is the most subscribers with the most views on videos, which doesn't really get us the sense of what do we mean by best. And does best automatically mean most views and most things? And so there's this sense where he's been criticizing traditional media for moving too slow. It's like, you just got to go, you just got to keep moving. And now he's kind of getting in trouble for some of the events that he's had that have a lot of injuries and some bad work environments, and not safety for the contestants. So now he's having to wrestle with this idea of like, go, 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 go. This very hyper startup culture. You have to be an 18 player. You have to do all these things. Whereas I think you're so right in that whatever you want to call this estuary TLC, this thing that's happening on the internet that has kind of sprung around Paul, has always been the slow grow, the grassroots sort of thing of like, I just want to sit in the shadows and do my thing. And if somebody gets famous from that, okay, great. I think most of us would celebrate, but that's not the point. Because if it was just purely virality, it wouldn't build the way it needs to to launch in a way that could be helpful for more people.
Another thing I see from Paul is that he tries to set the broadest possible walls. Like, he does have his limits. You know, he's said on more than one occasion that if someone bullies Freddie, he has zero tolerance for that. Like, he does have his limits. But at the same time, I see him setting basically the highest possible standard he can for himself. And because it's that highest possible ideal that we can, I'm not even saying that Paul is the ultimate embodiment of this ideal, but I do think he aims for it. And because we have the highest ideal that, let's say, we're aiming for as a collective, and in the love and forgiveness, but we have the broadest possible tent that anyone, yeah, it's kind of like the prodigal son. I always go back to the prodigal son, but it's like, even though the younger son is probably nowhere near ready to be fully back integrated into his family, into his community, the father goes running out to him. So it's like that little seed that you can play with others. Like, we're sort of, I think of that as like, yeah, come back in. Anyway, so that combination of the broadest possible tent and the highest possible ideal, I think, is keeping and calling people.
Nick, do you got anything? I'm gonna close this out at 9 o'clock my time. I just decided to. This is a little aside. Sometimes when I start live streams and then I leave and then other people come on, it goes to like 4 hours. I think I'm not gonna do that every time. I'm just gonna close them out when I'm done sometimes, because they become this whole other thing, and we could just have that's fine. But
I think what you want to do is you're encouraging other people to do their own
start your own stream. Yeah.
But I want to hijack yours, Luke.
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing that you asked, Neil, I think Paul is right that if he suddenly if he suddenly went viral and let's say 5,000 people arrived to, let's say, the Discord, and all of the streams had 100 people watching and writing in the comment section, it would basically destroy the TLC. I think the better way, the only way it can grow and still keep doing what it's doing is by more like reproduction, and it would have to be by something in the real world on the earth. I think this is how the TLC grows. Is the things need to grow on the level of the earth, and those will all come together at the TLC level. But it would be here, where the growth happens.
Yep, I agree with that. I think that's right. Like, in these little iterations that will probably carry the spirit of TLC, but doing something specific.
But that is sort of happening and I mean this in both directions, that, for example, like Chad is bringing people from his real life into TLC. Mark S is one of those. And then another example of that is Sourdough Neil brought in Clara into TLC, and Clara was an in-person friend of Neil. So, yeah.
Yeah, Clara is definitely doing something specific. I mean, whatever she's doing.
Well, Freddie and I talk about it all the time, of like the spirit of estuary infests our lives in all of these different ways, even if it's not sitting in an estuary group doing some estuary protocol. Like, this spirit has changed us. And I'm sure there was a piece of it that was already there before we started this, but it kind of developed it and opened it up where we can bring that spirit into our church. We can bring that to the birthday parties that we go to for our friends' children. You can find that spirit, and it doesn't always have to be about the intellect and these ideas of Peterson, Peugeot, Paul. Like, it's something, I think there's something more going on. And I think there is a lot of potential for it, and there's something very beautiful for it. And even if it doesn't it won't stay in this iteration. But I think there are seeds that have been planted that will go on to create something beautiful that are more targeted and specific.
Right. I think that's it. I mean, I said earlier, and I think this is true. The more I think about it, it's like receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. Like I said, that's the entirety of my theology and my anthropology, probably.
Say it again.
Receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. Because implanted logos. So like it's that thing that is there. It's there, but it has to die and generate and slowly ferment in the soil and come forth and do its own thing. And then that seed goes and does that thing over here. And it just spreads and spreads and spread. But the pattern of that seed just manifests all over the place. And those plants then will do their own thing. And it's kind of like because even estuary, somebody said that recently, like PVK was talking about estuary, or even conferences. Those are still, I think these are fine emergent events and phenomena that are happening out of TLC, and they're great, but they're still pretty thinky-talky. You know, like estuary isn't the goal. I think the goal is, it's fine. It's good, I think. Like I like estuary, but then the goal is something beyond estuary, and maybe it's a step toward more local, instantiated spirit of TLC, where people who actually live in the same towns, because you know, the internet stuff is fine. It doesn't need to be denigrated, which is a point that we've made many times, you know, like this isn't nothing. This is important. This is good, but it's also, but it can't be just this.
Yeah. Well, the nice thing about the in-person stuff is that it can't be just this because of how in-person people work. Like we sit and we have dinner with each other, and like, yeah, there might be some thinky-talky stuff, but there's something about bringing it into the real life place where even if you want it to just be thinky-talky, it can't be.
Yeah.
People are too dynamic for that.
For sure. See you, Neil.
See you.
Last words? No? Nick, last words? No? You're muted.
No, it's fine.
Okay. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for joining me. I'm going to shut her down now and go rock and roll this. Everybody should watch Cassidy's new video. I haven't watched it yet with Lucas. Yeah. Your conversation with also, I don't know if you have looked at the comments or you've just been busy momming it and doing other things, but your conversation with Faraday was awesome.
Oh,
it was really good. I really loved
Oh,
it.
yeah.
Faraday, he just like when he talks, he just like says things, and I'm just like, it's one of the. I want to play this clip. I'm just like, Faraday gets it. Faraday gets it. Now I want to play this clip before we leave. Let's close with this. Our good friend Sam, and it's on your channel, Cassidy.
Oh, it is.
Yeah. Here we go. Ready? I've probably shared this with you before, but
Maybe.
this is slow loading.
Over time, the more I interact with you, the more I realize you've been right this whole time. Not always, but sometimes.
Oh, Sam!
I also know how to push your buttons, but over time,
There we go. See, I need to get better at this I need to get better at this technological stuff, and that can be my clip. I just throw up like Chad when he does his like
Your branding.
No. We don't do that. My branding. No. All right. Thanks everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks, Luke.
Go love someone. Maybe your enemy. Peace out, G's.